All right, so now we're going to take a look, sort of piggybacking on the whole organic chemistry section. We'll take a look at class of molecules or a class of compounds known as polymers, and we'll see several different types of these. So the first thing that we need to define is what a polymer is, and a polymer is simply a large, very large molecule that is made up of repeating units. And these repeating units are linked together, so bonded together. The name that we give to these repeating units, we refer to these as monomers. So a polymer, the prefix poly here meaning many, is different. It's a large molecule made up of many of these monomers. Monomers are just a single unit. So polymers tend to be on the order of maybe thousands or hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of these monomers that are linked together. And they're typically long strings of repeating chemical blocks, which are these repeating units. And they're very common. So there are two general types that we'll take a look at. We'll take a look at natural ones. We'll take a look at synthetic ones. Natural versus synthetic. So it may be obvious from the name, but a natural polymer would be one that is produced by animal or plant life. So natural to the surroundings. And synthetic ones do not occur naturally. So that means they are produced by humans. In a lab, for example, or in a chemical plant or whatever, not in our bodies, but outside of our bodies. So natural versus synthetic, and we'll take a look, first of all, at the natural polymers, and we'll give you some examples of these, and then we'll kind of dive into maybe a couple of important ones. So natural polymers include things like starches. Starch is a polymer, glycogen. So kind of, where you find these things, starch is found in foods. Glycogen is found in your muscles or your liver. There's cellulose that's found in plants, the plant cell walls, for example, things like bark in the trees. Very common. There are also things like proteins. Those are polymers as well. Okay, proteins you find in like your hair, your nails, maybe wool that are made by sheep, for instance. And there's also things called nucleic acids. Okay, and these include things like your DNA, RNA. Okay, these are things that make you who you are. So we'll just say genes. Right, a gene, the thing in your body that is responsible for the color of your eyes, color of your hair, that's your DNA, and your DNA is an example of a nucleic acid, right? So we have lots of examples of these natural polymers. The ones that we're going to focus on here are the ones that are based on cellulose. Okay, so we refer to these polymers that are Um, uh, chemistry is based on cellulose. We refer to these as cellulosics. Materials whose chemistry is based on cellulose. So what is cellulose in the first place? Well, cellulose is a polymer, as you mentioned. So it's a big molecule. And what is the monomer that makes up cellulose? What's the building block of cellulose? Well, it's a polymer of glucose. And glucose is probably the most common example of a sugar there is. Glucose is known as it's a sugar. It's also known as dextrose or blood sugar. When you have your blood sugar measure, this is what you are measuring, your levels of glucose in the blood. That's an example of a sugar. It is also known as a monosaccharide, meaning that it's a simple sugar. It's a single sugar unit, and it has the chemical formula C6H12O6, right? So we have carbons, we have oxygens, and we have a bunch of hydrogens in there as well. And, as we talked about before, each of these things has their own bonding pattern. Carbon likes to form 4 bonds, hydrogen 1, oxygen 2. So the glucose itself, if we were to draw the structure for it, it'll look something like this. So we have our C at the top, we have an oxygen, we have an H, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have down at the bottom, we have a C, 2 H's, and an OH, and then it goes like this for glucose. So what we're seeing here is, again, one of the characteristics of carbon that likes to form a chain. And we haven't looked at structures like these before, but just so that you know, there's a carbon here, obviously. There's a carbon here at the bottom. And at each of these points where the lines intersect, there's a carbon there as well. This is just a shorthand notation to draw these structures. So there's a carbon at each of these positions. So there's one, there's another one, there's another one, and then there's another one. So there's 4 here that are implied, and then 2 at the end. So those are the 6 carbons. When you count the H's, are 12, and then 6 oxygen. So glucose looks like this. This is called the chain version. However, we know that carbon, especially when you have several of them connected, they can also form rings or cycles. And when glucose turns into a ring or a cycle, it is actually more stable. Okay, so it actually prefers to be in the ring form. And if we were to draw the ring structure for glucose, it'll look something like this. Draw this accurately. So there's my O, C, there's the C, there's a C, H, 2, OH sticking out. Carbon here, carbon, another one, and then another one. Okay, we have an OH there, an OH, an H at the top. So it's going to look something like this. And again, each of the carbon has 4 bonds. So the oxygen has 2, each of the hydrogen has 1. So this ring structure here is actually more stable. And this is the way that glucose is going to exist in normal situations in your body in solution when it's dissolved in water, for example. So cellulose, right, is simply a polymer of this. It's one of the polymers of glucose. So specifically now we're going to have hundreds of thousands of these glucoses that are linked together to give you this cellulose structure. Right. So I'll just give you a quick overview of what this is actually going to look like. All right, so down here we have, again, the structure of glucose. So there's a chain structure with our 6 carbons outlined. This actually forms the ring structure very easily. So the mechanism by which it does that is really not that important for us. So this is the chain. that we have here on the left side, and then we have the ring on the right, and the ring is going to be more stable. Right, so that's the preferred arrangement. Again, you don't see the carbons here, but there's a carbon at each of these positions where these lines kind of intersect. Okay, and they also omit the H's just for simplicity's sake, but there's a C at each of these positions. So when you string a bunch of these together in a particular arrangement, a bunch of these glucoses together, we end up with a structure um, of cellulose, right? So this is what your cellulose would look like. And this is showing you two layers of cellulose. So we have one layer here at the top in yellow of these glucoses linked together. And this is giving you a better idea of how the molecule is actually going to look. It's not really flat like this. It's more sort of puckered. Kind of looks like a chair, for instance, if you can imagine it that way. And then we have another layer underneath, and you have these layers of these strings of glucoses that are packed on top of each other. And that gives very, very good strength to the molecule, right? So if you were to look at the cellulose under a electron micrograph, you'd see, or electron microscope, you would see them kind of packed parallel to each other, sort of layered on top of each other to give you a lot of structural strength and integrity with it. So the point here is cellulose is a polymer, and so it's a huge, large molecule made up of repeating units of glucoses that are strung together. So glucose is the monomer that makes up cellulose. And cellulosics are going to be these natural materials that are based on cellulose. From the viewpoint of fire, this tends to be the most important of those natural polymers. Okay, we'll take a look at how where these are in a second.